Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marcus Sadu, and today we're going to be chatting about intermittent fasting, or more accurately, time-restricted feeding, but I'm going to use the term intermittent fasting in this episode just because it's the term that most folks are familiar with. Now, just a little heads up, I am in Medellin, Colombia at the moment, and my apartment is on a fairly busy street, so if you hear some motorcycles and cars and car alarms and dogs and all sorts of shit, sorry, doing the best I can here, working with what I've got. So let's dig in here. I put out a podcast on intermittent fasting a little over 2 years ago now with Jeff Rothschild. That is episode number 7 of the podcast, if you'd like to go back and have a listen. But I thought I'd revisit the topic as far as who it's potentially for, who it may not be for, and how it actually works specifically in regards to fat loss. Typically when I get questions from folks about IF, they come couched like intermittent fasting, thoughts? And it's like, well, man, I got a lot of thoughts. Or intermittent fasting, good or bad. And it's sort of like saying a hammer, thoughts? Or a screwdriver, good or bad. I mean, you can use a screwdriver to build a house, or you can use it to stab someone in the eye. So it sort of depends how you use this stuff, right? What for, and also it's really important to remember that it is just a tool. So a pencil is awesome for drawing a picture, but it sucks if you want to chop a carrot. So before we get into the details around IF, I think it's important to note that when we're looking at most things and what their application is, there's often more to the situation than a simple good, bad, white, black, hot, cold. Like, who are you? What's your lifestyle like? What are your goals? What are your preferences, etc., etc. So there are plenty of different types of intermittent fasting, but the most common setup I'd say is something called 16-8, meaning you fast for 16 hours and you eat for 8 hours. So for example, you could skip breakfast and you could eat from noon until 8 p.m. And then you'd eat your next meal at noon the following day. Now, I find most folks that implement IF skip breakfast, being that it's just a lot more practical than skipping dinner, for example, because dinner time tends to be a lot more social, it's more of a family time, and folks are usually out the door pretty quickly in the morning. So given our societal setup, breakfast just seems to be the more popular and practical meal to skip when it comes to implementing fasting. Now, what are some of the benefits of IF? One benefit that you may have heard of is something called autophagy. Now, autophagy is just a fancy term for taking out the garbage essentially on a cellular level in your body. Now, just by living our day-to-day lives, we accumulate damaged proteins in our bodies, and this is completely normal and unavoidable to a degree. And by not eating for a period of time, we give our bodies a chance to clean up those damaged cells. Essentially, we recycle them and get rid of them. And of course, it's a lot more complicated than that in a scientific sense, but that's really what it comes down to. That's all you really need to know. For example, if you wake up at 6 a.m. and eat breakfast, then you're eating and snacking pretty much right up until you go to bed at 11 p.m. or say midnight, your body only really has 6 hours of time when it's not directly dealing with incoming food. Now, a single 24-hour period or maybe a weekend here and there of that is not going to cause any issues. But if this is your regular routine month after month, year after year, it's likely not the healthiest meal cadence because our bodies aren't meant to be digesting food around the clock. Now, if you're going, say, 11 or 12 hours a day without eating, I highly doubt that you're seeing much negative impacts as far as autophagy goes. I mean, there may be some small additional benefits to going, say, 14 or 16 hours without feeding. However, once you reach that 12-hour mark, more or less, I don't think that you're getting that much more benefit, meaning I think there's a point of diminishing returns here. But regardless, we just need more research around autophagy in general. Now, another potential benefit of IF is having a smaller eating window or less frequent meals. and you're just more likely to eat less. So for example, if you're eating from 7 a.m. until 11 p.m., on average, you're probably going to consume more calories than someone eating from noon until 8 p.m. More opportunities to eat equates to more calories consumed for the vast majority of folks. This is how IF works from a fat loss perspective. Less calories consumed means less body fat. This is how every single fat loss protocol works. So there's nothing inherently special about IF when it comes to fat loss. The way it works is via calories in, calories out, just like a low carb diet, just like a high carb diet, say a vegan diet, a ketogenic diet. Every single eating approach that results in fat loss does so by reducing overall calorie intake in one way or another. Now, I've heard folks say that intermittent fasting lets them eat more food and still stay leaner, and it actually doesn't. But it may feel like you're eating more because you may be eating more calories in a specific window during the day. But if we take a step back and look at the entire 24-hour period, if you're losing weight, it's because you've reduced your overall calorie intake. Now, if you Google benefits of intermittent fasting, you'll probably come up with a list including things like improved insulin resistance, reduced inflammation, longer lifespan. And these benefits could be from IF, but they aren't necessarily from IF directly. They're likely from the weight loss that's associated with IF or a combination of the two. Now, again, this goes for any diet that has you lose fat because body fat will increase your risk of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, inflammation. You're more likely to have a shorter lifespan. So I really want to hammer home the point that there's nothing inherently special about IF necessarily or any other diet that has you lose fat. The most important thing is that you're of a healthful body weight and take a nutritional approach that you can follow long-term and sustain, because it's the healthful body weight aspect that's the most important part here, not necessarily the specific diet approach itself. One potential drawback of IF is that it can be a minor stressor. So not eating for longer periods of time will increase something called cortisol acutely, which is a stress hormone you may have heard of. Now, increasing cortisol isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if, for example, say you're a single parent, you've got 2 kids at home, you're working full time, you're not sleeping enough, implementing IF could potentially be enough to send you over the edge stress-wise. So as far as who IF is for and who it's not for, if you already feel like you're stressed to the gills, adding intermittent fasting on top of that may not be the best call. Now, on the other hand, if you're managing your daily stressors well, you're sleeping enough, and you'd like to give IF a shot because you think it might help you control your weight, that could be the right fit. Now, I want to mention one more potential benefit of implementing IF, and in my opinion, it's the biggest possible takeaway. So we're so used to eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks that skipping a meal or two here and there can provide you with a ton of food freedom. Let me give you an example. Let's say every day you're used to eating breakfast, lunch, a snack, dinner, and then snacking pre-bed. And you've got it in your head that if you miss a meal, you get all hangry, you get irritable and short with people. You're heavily reliant on eating super frequently. And if you don't, your entire mood and how you are with folks goes to shit. So in my opinion, that's an issue. If you can't miss one meal or skip one meal and still be productive, focused, and able to interact with people, I think that you're overly reliant on feeding. So what intermittent fasting or just skipping a meal, or call it whatever you want, can provide you with is a super empowering feeling around not needing and relying on food all the time. So if you can't go on an hour or 2 long hike without a bag of trail mix or a power bar, I think that's a problem. I think it's actually a sign of poor blood sugar management and lack of metabolic flexibility, because if you do even some minor exercise and your blood sugar plummets and you feel like shit, I think you'd really benefit from practicing skipping a meal or two here and there, because your body is meant to know how to manage blood sugar without eating every 2 to 3 hours necessarily. Now, if you're thinking, fuck, I can't skip breakfast every day, try it just once a week. If that feels okay after a week or two, try skipping breakfast twice in a week. You don't have to go to the opposite end of the extreme right off the bat. You could even just skip a snack if you're the snacking type. Start there. Now, I've implemented this strategy with a bunch of my nutritional coaching clients that were interested in it, and it can be super powerful. So just some food for thought there, because a lot of folks have their day revolve around food versus food revolve around their day. And I used to be one of those folks. So I can speak to the empowerment of food freedom specifically. Now, I also just want to be clear that this isn't a promo for intermittent fasting. I just want to give you guys the ins and the outs, who it may be for, who it may not be for, as well as how and why it may work. There's nothing inherently special about IF itself, but some folks find it useful and they see benefits from it from a weight loss perspective and then therefore a health perspective. And I still stand by the biggest benefit being more freedom around food. I just think it's so powerful not needing to rely on feeding so frequently and having access to food at all times. I mean, some folks have such funky blood sugar that when they're driving home from work, for example, they feel like they have to stop at a gas station and pick up something, anything, just to get back to baseline. And again, I think that's an issue. And losing weight will and can help with blood sugar management, of course, but so can skipping a meal or two here and there. Now, my personal experience with IF is that I do it daily, and I actually have for years. And the reason that I implement it may not be the reasons that you or someone else may want to implement it, but I'll share with you how and why it works for me personally. When I wake up in the morning, I don't tend to be all that hungry, and I love coffee. So I do a couple cups of that, which suppresses my appetite as well to a degree. And I like to just get straight to work. So I don't actually implement skipping breakfast to control my weight necessarily. I do it because it works really well with my lifestyle and my preferences. I just don't want to wake up and make something to eat first thing. I much prefer to throw the coffee on and start working right away in the morning, because that is my most productive time work-wise. And I just feel like breakfast kind of slows me down, both physically and on a small scale, but also just from a getting shit done standpoint, because cooking and eating takes time. A couple more reasons why I choose to skip breakfast is because I prefer much bigger meals less frequently versus smaller meals more frequently. I don't know why, it's just my preference. And I also find that it saves me time when it comes to cooking. I only make 2 meals per day, so a big lunch and a big dinner, and it saves me from cooking, say, 7-ish times a week, which equates to more time doing other stuff that I like to do. Now, occasionally I will eat 3 meals a day if I feel like it. This stuff is not set in stone, and if I do eat 3 times a day, it typically happens on the weekend, so a Saturday or a Sunday, but during the week, for the most part, I go with lunch and dinner. Now, just to recap here, IF works for fat loss because of calorie balance. So calories in versus calories out. So if you see someone talking about the magical benefits of intermittent fasting for fat loss, now you know the mechanism at play, because it's the same mechanism that makes every diet approach work. And this individual that's talking about some sort of special benefit from IF from a fat loss perspective probably has something to sell. Now, it's worth noting that there could be some additional benefits around autophagy, but if you're going, say, 11 or 12 hours per day without eating, you're probably totally fine on the autophagy front. But again, there could be some additional benefits to going, say, 14, 16, maybe even 24 hours, but we need more research in this area. If you're thinking about implementing this approach, first of all, just take a step back and look at your lifestyle objectively from an overall stress standpoint, and then move forward from there. And also, don't feel the need to go balls deep and skip breakfast, for example, for the rest of your life. If you try it and it's not working for you, give it up, no sweat. You can look at all this nutrition stuff like trying on a pair of pants. How do they fit? Do you like the feel? How about the style? If the answer to all those questions is great and yes, then you might want to implement X approach long term. But if you don't like the pants and you don't like how they fit, don't buy them, move on. If you're interested in personalized one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout programming with me, you can check out the website at n1fitness.com/coaching, which is linked below in the show notes. You can also follow me on Instagram at N1Fitness and friend me up at Marcus Sadu on Facebook as well. I hope you guys found this episode useful. Thanks so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.